I grew up a Muslim and I left Islam a few years ago. And in this video, I want to explain exactly why. I left not because I felt angry or because someone convinced me to sway into a different belief or anything like that. I left because I couldn't ignore what I keep seeing and hearing and reading over and over again. For most of my life, I believe in God through Islam without really questioning it. I believed in it because that's what was handed to me. That's how I grew up. And for a lot of times, that felt normal until it didn't anymore. I started to question things a few years ago when I first went to Australia to study my master's degree. So in there, I saw a lot of different perspectives, religious beliefs, and a lot of the stuff around me that makes me question why I believe what I believe. One of the first questions that I had was that, why do people look at me like that? I wore a hijab at a time, and for some reason, it made me feel like I was actually being targeted for some reason, just by the way people look at me. So that experience raised a question in my head, why? So I kind of like started to study, why do I wear hijab again? And this is when I started to study a little bit deeper into Qur'an and actually trying to see, why do I wear a hijab? Why do I believe in Islam? What is it about this religion that makes me feel like it's the truth and I have to believe in it? That's when things started to crack. So one of the verses that I came across and stopped me immediately was on Qur'an 4:34. Here's what it says. Men are in charge of women by right of what Allah has given one over the other and what they spend for maintenance from their wealth. As for those women from whom you fear disobedience, admonish them, forsake them in bed, and strike them. But if they obey you, seek no means against them. So women is pretty much demanded to submit to men and have to obey to men, and men is placed as this authoritative rule against women, and women just need to obey. So this verse is just pretty much saying that men are in charge of women and women just have to be obedient to men. Otherwise, men are allowed to strike them, to forsake them, and pretty much just to do any kind of like disciplinary action to them. And this is not just one verse. There are plenty others that are talking about similar things. But guess what? It doesn't work the other way around. And I keep trying and trying to see, is there any kind of like equal between men and women in Quran? And guess what? There's none. Then I also come across Quran verse 282. Here's what it says. And bring 2 witnesses from among your men, and if there are not 2 men, then 1 man and 2 women, so that if one of the women errs, the other can remind her. So what it means pretty much is that the worth of women's testimony or the value of their testimony is pretty much half of the value that what men could provide. Now, this sounds very weird to me, because think about it. Will Almighty, timeless God actually put this into position? Or is this more like something that men would make? Because it sounds a lot like a historical or cultural context to me than a book of God. Here's another thing that I found. Women are just so well instructed when it comes to public appearance and modesty. Have a look at verse 24-31. Tell the believing women to lower their gaze and guard their private parts and not display their adornment except that which ordinarily appears thereof. Now, I want to put in a context. In verse 24-30, men were told to also lower their gaze. But guess what? Only female that were told to actually cover themselves up, conceal themselves, and pretty much do not tempt anybody when you go out. And this is especially funny, like when I go out, and this is no disrespectful to my Muslim friends, all right? But every time I go near the beach and I saw a Muslim couple, men are just like freely going out with their tight shorts and everything. And guess what the women wear to the beach? The whole thing is covered, the whole thing. And why men is okay to just be themselves and like wear very tight shorts and everything. Does that even make sense to you? If this is a cultural thing, I would understand that because it's probably coming from men's preference, right? That sets the rule and all of that. But what I have a problem with, the fact that all of these supposed to be coming from the word of God, yet why does God sound like he is proing men a lot and kind of like lowering women a lot? Then came the violence. Growing up, I was always being told that Islam is a peaceful religion. And don't get me wrong, many Muslims are. And I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about Islam and the teaching of Islam. So when I first saw Quran Surah 8 or 9, I was very surprised. These were like very violent stuff. And this is not metaphorical or anything. This was real physical violence. Have a look here. Quran 8:12. I will cast terror into the hearts of those who disbelieve. So strike above the necks and strike from them every fingertip. Quran 9:5. Then kill polytheists wherever you find them. 9:29. Fight those who do not believe in Allah until they pay the jizya with willing submission and feel themselves subdued. Now, if you ask Muslims this, they will say that it's contextual, like it's not necessarily what's supposed to happen today. But my question is this: if this is really the book of God, then why is this not something that is timeless? Then why is it still there if it's not something that you should take an example from? And why would a loving, universal, timeless God is proing violence so much? If people don't believe, then strike their necks? Really? So, like, none of the things that I mentioned is enough for me to be able to kind of like think that Islam is something that is not coming from God. I just kept on going. And the next bit, I look at Muhammad, because Muhammad, according to Qur'an, is this figure that is supposed to be a perfect example for humanity. He is the prophet that discovered Islam after all. So I started to look at his life and his historical evidences of the things that he did throughout his life. And I look at all this from solid Islamic sources such as the Quran itself or hadiths that were approved at the time. And I do not listen from the public opinion about Muhammad, like from the imam or from the ustad, whatever you want to call them. I no longer listen to that because I feel like there are lots of cherry picking involved in that. And guess what I found? Here it is. I was really struggling in the beginning when I found out that Muhammad was doing a bunch of stuff that the perfect moral example is not supposed to do. For example, he was very violent during rape. He was doing child marriage. He was doing a lot of violence and executions to people. And he was doing polygamy that were justified by revelation. So he led military campaigns. He had multiple wives. And one of the things that sickens me to my stomach is the fact that he actually married Aisha when she was 6 years old. And guess what? He had sex with her when she was 9 years old. I have a 9 years old myself. I cannot imagine my very innocent 9 years old getting married with a 50-something years old man. And this is supposed to be the example of all humanity? So let's entertain this for a little bit, all right? Let's just say that everything that he said about Islam and the revelation was real. Then why does it sound so much like it's more towards like a man fantasy and desire as opposed to a real kind of like loving revelations from God itself? So like that alone is not enough. Let's keep going. Hell in Quran was described in a very vivid graphic details. Burning, skin being replaced. You have to walk in a very thin hairline, otherwise you will fall into the fire. Endless punishment. That's basically what it is. And then that's when I realized something. Fear is actually not just present in the Quran, it's actually the central of it all, because it keeps being repeated over and over again in many different places. And guess what fears do? It keeps people being obedient, it keeps people quiet, it keeps people in line. So I asked myself this question: would a gracious and peaceful and loving God use this as a part of the Quran itself? Or was this actually a very effective human control mechanism made by Muhammad? Then there's paradise. If you read about paradise in the Quran, don't be surprised. It is very physical, very sensual, and very much male-centric. Multiple wives provided, sexual desires completed, and guess what? Very little clarity about what will female get as opposed to what will men get. Have a look at these verses. Quran 56 verse 22 to 24. And for them are fair women with large beautiful eyes as reward for what they used to do. Quran 78:33. And full bosom maidens of equal age. So paradise is described as this place where men would actually finally got these sexual desires completed because they have to do good on earth according to the Quran standard. So my question is this: why does the book of God is describing the heaven that is supposed to be divine and holy to be like this carnal place for fulfilling male desires? Does this sound like God creation or human creation to you? And like everything is not enough, then came this big issue and contradiction of all time in the Quran. Have a look at this verse. Quran 3:3-4. He revealed the Torah and the gospel before as guidance for mankind. Let the people of the gospel judge by what Allah has revealed therein. So pretty much Quran told everybody, Muslims and whoever is reading, that if you have any question, if you have any kind of doubt, you have to go back to the Bible. That's pretty much what it says. Yet for some reason, in another part of the Quran itself contradicts the main essence of the Bible, which is the fact that Jesus was crucified and Jesus was actually resurrected. And in multiple places, in a very subtle way, Jesus claimed to be God. So which one is it? Do we have to refer to it? Or does it actually not true because you're contradicting it? So let's recap logically. If the Bible is actually corrupted, like a lot of Muslims says, then actually Quran is contradicting the whole thing, because Quran affirms that you have to refer back and go back to the gospel for the truth. But then if the gospel is actually the truth, and whatever the gospel is saying is the truth, then Quran is also not the truth, because it's actually contradicting everything that the gospel is saying. So either way, something really serious breaks right here. So Islam claims that Quran is actually the perfect revelation, the perfect and the final one. Yet, Muhammad didn't actually write all the things in the Quran himself. He didn't actually even instruct the people that follows him to write things down. So what happened is, the Quran itself is being written by the memory of the people around Muhammad after Muhammad dies, not before. And at the end of the day, only one version of the Quran was chosen under the Caliph Usman. And everything else, other version of it that people remembers, were destroyed. Now, this alone doesn't prove any kind of falsehood, but if you kind of start to go back to the previous points that I mentioned before about the contradictions, about the moral tensions, about the fact that the historical evidence were just ignored in the Quran in so many different places, then it kind of becomes very clear that Quran is most likely is not coming from the revelation of God, but it's more towards human construction. So this is what I believe. Muslims is not the problem. Muslims are the people. And a lot of the Muslims that I know are kind, are peaceful, are just doing things from their heart. But here's the reality. A lot of Muslims haven't even read Quran from start to finish. A lot of them don't even know what the Quran says. A lot of them understand Islam from the filtered perspective that they found on different kind of what communities or imams are saying, instead of really studying the truth, the evidence, the logical, the historical stuff, instead of really studying what the Quran actually says and the data that supports it. A lot of them actually believe in Islam just because of the cultural things being handed over to them, just like I was. If I don't start questioning Islam like I did, I would probably believe in it until the end of my age without actually knowing and realizing how wrong the whole system is. So what I'm questioning here is not the Muslims, it's actually Islam and the claim that Quran is actually the revelation of God instead of the creation of Muhammad. So all of these are the reason why I decided to leave Islam many years ago. And I do not regret every second of it, because there is nothing worse than living in a lie, just pretending to believe in something that deep down you knew something was wrong, and you do that as a performance because of a lot of people looking at you as a cultural or family kind of pressure. This was what happened to me anyway, until I decided to stop doing it. So I became agnostic for about 7 years after that. I still kind of be curious about different kind of religious or options or higher powers out there. I started to question things of why we exist in this world and all of that. And a few years ago, I came across Jesus. And he's not only the total opposite of what God being revealed in Islam and in Quran, but all the historical and logical evidence of Jesus was actually rock solid. I will link a video to that where I go through all the evidence that made me believe in Jesus in the description below. But what I want to ask you before finishing this video is this. If you could ask yourself and study deeper into what Islam really teaches and what are the data out there telling you, would you actually go deeper regardless of what the community and your culture is telling you to believe?